In the gaslit fog of Victorian London, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson face one of their most peculiar cases yet, the inexplicable vanishing of sound itself within the Grand Royal Lyric Theatre. What begins as a theatrical nuisance spirals into a labyrinth of greed, revenge, and scientific trickery, challenging Holmes' unparalleled deductive powers. With a cunning mastermind pulling the strings, this mystery promises a crescendo of suspense and a final twist that will echo through the annals of Baker Street. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Summons. The fire crackled in the hearth of 221B Baker Street, casting dancing shadows across the cluttered room. It was a damp October evening in 1890, and the fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, muffling the clatter of hansoms and the cries of newsboys. "Hein, Doctor?" John Watson sat in my armchair, attempting to read the latest issue of the Lancet, though my attention wandered to my friend Sherlock Holmes, who lounged upon the settee, his violin resting idly across his chest. Holmes had been in one of his moods, silent, almost languid, his sharp grey eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the ceiling. For 3 days, no case had stirred his restless intellect, and I feared he might resort to less savoury distractions. But fate, as it often did, intervened. A sharp rap at the door broke the stillness. Mrs. Hudson's voice, tinged with exasperation, announced a visitor. Before I could rise, the door burst open, and a man stumbled in, a wiry figure in a velvet frock coat, his face pale and his eyes wild with agitation. His hat, clutched in trembling hands, bore the crest of the Royal Lyric Theatre. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, his voice cracking. "I am Reginald Vane, manager of the Royal Lyric. You must help us. It sits, the most extraordinary thing. The sound, it sits gone." Holmes' eyes snapped to the man, his lethargy vanishing like smoke. He sat upright, the violin sliding to the floor with a soft thud. "Gone, you say?" His voice was low, eager. "Explain yourself, Mr. Vane. Leave no detail unspoken." Vane collapsed into a chair, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "It began 2 nights ago during a rehearsal of the Songbird's Lamente. The orchestra was in full swell, the soprano at her crescendo when nothing, absolute silence. Not a note, not a whisper. The audience thought it a stunt, but the musicians were playing, the singer was singing, yet no sound reached us. It lasted a full minute, then returned as if nothing had happened." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. His lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. "Curious," he murmured, "and this has recurred." "Last night, worse." Vane continued. "Half the performance was silent. Patrons are furious, demanding refunds. Worse still, last night, £500 in gold and notes vanished from my office during the chaos. The theatre faces ruin, Mr. Holmes. I implore you to investigate." Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze distant yet piercing. "A theatre where sound itself plays truant, and a theft conveniently timed. Tell me, Mr. Vane, who knew of the money sit's location?" "Only my assistant, Miss Clara Wren, and the lead investor, Sir Henry Caldwell." "Oh, and the composer, Mr. Felix Durant. He was in my office earlier that day." "Very good." Holmes sprang to his feet, his energy now electric. "Watson, fetch your coat. We depart for the Royal Lyric at once. Mr. Vane, you will accompany us and ensure no one tampers with the scene." As we gathered our things, Holmes' sipped eyes gleamed with that familiar fire. "A case where silence speaks louder than sound, Watson. This promises to be most diverting." The hansom rattled through the fog, carrying us toward the Grand Theatre on Drury Lane. I could not shake the unease that Vane's tale stirred, a mystery where the very air seemed to conspire against us. Little did I know, this was but the opening note of a symphony far darker and more intricate than I could imagine. The mystery of the disappearing sound is just beginning to unfold. Where are you listening this from? London's foggy streets, a cozy cafe, or somewhere far across the globe? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next chapter of Holmes and Watson's thrilling adventure. Chapter 2. The Silent Theatre. The Royal Lyric Theatre loomed through the fog like a palace of shadows, its ornate facade illuminated by flickering gaslights. As our hansom drew to a halt, the grandeur of Drury Lane seemed at odds with the eerie tale Reginald Vane had spun. Holmes, his scarf pulled tight against the damp, surveyed the building with a hawk-like intensity, his eyes darting from the gilded arches to the darkened alleyways flanking the structure. Inside, the theatre was a cavern of opulence, crimson velvet curtains, chandeliers glinting like constellations, and rows of empty seats stretching into the gloom. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the silence Vane described lingered like an uninvited guest. The manager led us to the stage, where a few stage hands and musicians milled about, their faces drawn with confusion and unease. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Vane said, gesturing to the auditorium, "this is where it happened. The orchestra was here, the soprano there, and the audience, well, they heard nothing." Holmes strode to the center of the stage, his boots echoing sharply in the vast space. He knelt, examining the polished boards, then rose and paced to the orchestra pit. "Watson, do you notice anything peculiar about the acoustics?" I strained my ears, but the theatre seemed ordinary, save for the faint creak of wood and the distant drip of water somewhere backstage. "It sounds normal now," I ventured. "Precisely," Holmes replied, his voice sharp, yet Vane claims sound itself vanished, an impossibility, unless he trailed off, his gaze fixed on the proscenium arch above. Without warning, he clapped his hands sharply. The sound reverberated, crisp and clear, rolling through the auditorium. Vane flinched. "It wasn't set like that. During the performance, it was as if the air swallowed every note." Holmes' desk eyes narrowed. "Show me your office, Mr. Vane. The theft may illuminate the silence." We followed Vane through a maze of corridors to a modest office tucked behind the stage. When the room was in disarray, papers strewn across a desk, a safe door ajar, its contents gone. Holmes examined the lock, his fingers tracing its edges. "No signs of forced entry," he murmured. "The thief had a key or exceptional skill." "Tell me, Vane, who has access to this safe?" "Only myself and Miss Wren," Vane replied. "Sir Henry has a key to the outer office, but not the safe. Durant was here, as I mentioned, but he left before the performance." Holmes knelt by the safe, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket. "A faint scratch here, and a trace of oil. Curious." He stood, brushing his hands. "Watson, we must observe the theatre in action. Vane arrange for a rehearsal tomorrow evening. Ensure all performers and crew are present, exactly as they were during the incidents." Vane nodded, though his hands trembled. "You think the thief and the silence are connected?" Holmes' smile was enigmatic. "I think, Mr. Vane, that silence is rarely silent. It speaks if one knows how to listen." As we left the office, Holmes paused, his head tilted as if catching a faint sound I could not hear. "Watson," he said softly, "this theatre holds secrets beyond its curtains. Tomorrow we shall see what shadows it casts." Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The following morning, the fog had lifted, leaving London bathed in a pale autumnal light. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a litter of newspaper clippings and old theatre programmes, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling. I had grown accustomed to his methods, but the intensity of his focus never failed to intrigue me. "Watson," he said without looking up, "the Royal Lyric Theatre is no stranger to scandal. 10 years ago, a rival composer, one Edmund Travers, accused the theatre's then-manager of stealing his work. The dispute ended in Travers' ruin. He vanished from London society. Curious, don't you think?" "Connected to our case?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of tea. "Perhaps." Holmes rose, brushing ash from his dressing gown. "Vane mentioned Felix Durant, the current composer. His score for the Songbird Sit's Lament is the centerpiece of this season. If history repeats, we may find motive in old grudges." By noon, we were back at the Royal Lyric, where Vane had gathered the principal figures for questioning. The theatre's lounge, with its faded velvet chairs and heavy drapes, felt like a stage for secrets. First came Miss Clara Wren, Vane's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman of about 30, her demeanour poised but guarded. "Miss Wren," Holmes began, leaning back in his chair, "you have access to the safe. Where were you during the performance when the theft occurred?" Her lips tightened. "I was in the wings, ensuring the props were in order. I saw nothing unusual, Mr. Holmes, save for the dreadful silence." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And your relationship with Mr. Vane, or Sir Henry Caldwell?" She flushed slightly. "Professional, of course. Sir Henry is demanding, but I serve the theatre, not his whims." Next was Sir Henry Caldwell, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice and a gold watch chain that gleamed ostentatiously. "This nonsense is costing me a fortune," he blustered. "I invested heavily in this production, Holmes. Find the culprit, or I'll have Vine sit's head." Holmes Stimple's tone remained cool. "Your key to the office, Sir Henry. Where is it kept?" "On my person, always," Caldwell replied, patting his waistcoat. "No one could taken it." Finally, Felix Durant, the composer, entered, a gaunt man with nervous hands and a French accent. "The silence ruins my work," he said bitterly. "My music is my soul, Mr. Holmes. To have it stolen by silence, its sense unbearable." Holmes studied him closely. "You were in Vane's office before the theft. Did you notice anything peculiar?" Durant hesitated, his fingers twitching. "Only that Vane seemed distracted. He mentioned a letter, something about an old debt. I paid it no mind." As Durant left, Holmes leaned toward me, his voice low. "Each has a thread to pull, Watson. Durant sits reserve, Caldwell sits bluster, Durant sits nerves, they hide something. Tonight sits rehearsal will reveal more. Mark my words, the past echoes in this theatre, and we shall hear its tune." Chapter 4. The Vanishing Melody. The Royal Lyric Theatre buzzed with nervous energy as the rehearsal for the Songbird's Lament commenced that evening. The auditorium, half filled with stagehands, musicians, and a smattering of early patrons, thrummed with anticipation, though an undercurrent of unease lingered from the previous night's disturbances. Holmes and I took seats in the dress circle, offering a clear view of the stage, orchestra pit, and the shadowy wings where unseen hands worked the machinery of the performance. Holmes' eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned every detail, while I, armed with my notebook, prepared to record anything of note. The curtain rose, revealing a lavish set depicting a moonlit Venetian canal, its painted gondolas glinting under the gaslights. The orchestra struck up Felix Durand's haunting overture, a cascade of strings and woodwinds that filled the theatre with a melancholic beauty. Miss Clara Wren, now in her role as stage manager, darted between the wings, her silhouette flitting like a spectre. Sir Henry Caldwell, resplendent in a tailored evening suit, occupied a private box to our left, his opera glasses trained on the stage. Durand himself sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly, as if willing his music to defy the mysterious silence. The lead soprano, a striking woman named Madame Elena Voss, took center stage, her voice soaring in the aria's opening bars. Her notes were crystalline, piercing the heart with their clarity, until abruptly they were not. A hush fell, unnatural and absolute. The orchestra's bows continued to soar. Madame Voss's lips moved in fervent song, yet no sound reached us. The audience stirred, murmurs rising like a tide. I glanced at Holmes, whose posture had stiffened, his gaze darting from the stage to the chandeliers above. "Watson," he whispered, "observe the chandelier. The crystals are still. No vibration." I followed his gaze. The massive chandelier, a constellation of glass, hung motionless, its usual faint shimmer absent despite the orchestra's efforts. It was as if the very air had turned to stone, refusing to carry sound. The silence lasted perhaps 30 seconds before the music surged back, jarring in its suddenness. Madame Voss faltered, her face pale, and the orchestra scrambled to regain its rhythm. Vane, visible in the wings, clutched his head in despair. Holmes was on his feet, motioning for me to follow. We descended to the orchestra pit, where the musicians sat in disarray, their instruments idle. The conductor, a wiry man named Mr. Hargreaves, mopped his brow. "It's madness, Mr. Holmes. We played as always, but the sound, it vanished." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his tone calm but his eyes alight. He knelt beside a violinist's chair, his fingers brushing the floor. "Dust disturbed here recently, and this," he held up a tiny fragment of metal, glinting faintly under the stage lights. "A piece of something mechanical, Watson. Not part of any instrument." We moved to the stage, where Madame Voss stood, her hands trembling as she sipped water offered by Clara Wren. "I sung in Paris, Vienna, Milan," she said, her voice quavering. "Never have I known such a thing. It sits as if the theatre itself conspires against me." Holmes' gaze softened. "But only for a moment, Madame. Did you notice anything unusual before the silence? A scent, a movement, a flicker of light?" She frowned, her brow furrowing. "There was a faint hum, perhaps, just before, like a bee, but softer. I thought it my imagination." Holmes nodded, filing the detail away. He turned to Vane, who had joined us, his face ashen. "Mr. Vane, the precise moment of the silence, did it coincide with any stage effect? A light change, a curtain shift?" Vane shook his head. "Nothing, Mr. Holmes. The scene was static, the lights steady. That's why the audience was so unnerved. No distraction to explain it." Holmes paced the stage, his long shadow stretching across the boards. He paused by a trapdoor, used for dramatic entrances, and knelt to examine its hinges. "Oil, fresh and excessive," he murmured. "Someone has been busy here." He stood, brushing his hands. "Watson, this is no mere trick of acoustics. We are dealing with a deliberate act, one requiring preparation and precision. The theft and the silence are entwined, but the motive remains elusive. As the rehearsal resumed, haltingly, Holmes led me to the rear of the auditorium, where he stood in silence, his eyes sweeping the theatre's architecture. The answer lies in the structure itself, Watson. Sound is a wave, and waves can be manipulated. Tomorrow, we shall return with tools to probe deeper. For now, keep your eyes on our players, Vane, Wren, Caldwell, Durant, and the fiery Madame Voss. One of them knows more than they admit. As we stepped into the chilly night, the theatre's silhouette loomed behind us, its secrets locked within. I felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer, a puzzle as intangible as the vanished melody itself. Chapter 5. Suspects in the Spotlight. The morning after the rehearsal found Holmes and me in the dim, smoky confines of a coffee house near Drury Lane, where the clink of cups and murmur of voices provided a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the Royal Lyric Theatre. Holmes, nursing a black coffee, had spread a diagram of the theatre's layout across the table, his pencil marking points of interest: the orchestra pit, the trap-door, the chandelier. His brow was furrowed, his mind clearly racing through the tangle of clues we had gathered. "Watson," he said, tapping the diagram, "the phenomenon of the vanishing sound is no accident. It requires knowledge, access, and intent. Our suspects, Vane, Wren, Caldwell, Durant, and Madame Voss, each have means and opportunity. The question is motive." I nodded, sipping my tea. Vane seems desperate to save his theatre, but that could mask greed. Wren's composure feels too perfect, like she's hiding something. Caldwell's bluster suggests financial strain, and Durant, his passion for his music, borders on obsession. Madame Voss, though, she seemed genuinely shaken. Holmes' set lips quirked. "A fine observation, but never trust a performer sits tears, Watson. Let us examine them more closely." We returned to the theatre, where Vane had arranged for private interviews in a small parlour off the main foyer. The room, with its heavy brocade curtains and gilt-framed portraits of past performers, felt like a confessional, though I doubted any truths would come easily. First was Clara Wren, her posture rigid as she sat across from us. Holmes leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. "Miss Wren, you manage the theatre sex operations. Have you noticed any unusual visitors or deliveries in the past month? Perhaps equipment or tools not related to the production?" Her eyes flickered, but her voice remained steady. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Mr. Holmes. We receive props, costumes, sheet music, routine items. The theatre is a busy place." Holmes produced the metal fragment from the orchestra pit, holding it up to the light. "This was found among the instruments. Familiar." She studied it, her fingers twitching slightly. "It could be part of a tuning fork or a prop. If I don't know." Holmes nodded, dismissing her but not before noting, "Your hands betray your nerves, Miss Wren. We shall speak again." Sir Henry Caldwell entered next, his bulk filling the room with an air of impatience. "This is a waste of time, Holmes. I sit my victim here. My investment is at stake." Holmes' gaze was unyielding. "Sir Henry, your financial stake gives you motive. A failing theatre could be more profitable ruined, insurance perhaps, or a rival cyst's gain." Caldwell's face reddened. "Preposterous. I sunk thousands into this venture. I want it to succeed." "Yet your key grants access to Vane Sept's office," Holmes pressed, "and your wealth is rumoured to be stretched thin. A theft could cover debts, could it not?" Caldwell sputtered, but offered no clear denial, storming out with a muttered oath. Holmes turned to me. His temper is a shield, Watson. He knows more than he admits. Felix Durand was next, his gaunt frame hunched as if carrying a great weight. His eyes, dark and restless, darted between us. "Mr. Holmes, my music is my life. This silence, it sets sabotage, meant to ruin me." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Monsieur Durand, you mentioned a letter Vane received, about an old debt. What did you overhear?" Durand hesitated, his fingers twisting a ring on his left hand. Only fragments. Vane was agitated, muttering about Stebtid's long-buried Stetton Dada name from the past. Stetton. I thought it personal. Not my business. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And your own past, monsieur? You studied in Paris under a certain Professor Laroche, an expert in acoustics. Did he teach you more than music?" Durand paled, his voice sharp. "What are you implying? I am a composer, not a scientist." "Yet sound is your domain," Holmes countered, "and this mystery hinges on sound sets manipulation." As Durand left, visibly shaken, Holmes turned to me. "He knows something, Watson. But fear holds his tongue. Perhaps a connection to this Professor Laroche." Finally, Madame Voss swept in, her presence commanding despite her evident fatigue. "Mr. Holmes, this theatre is cursed. I cannot perform under such conditions." Holmes' tone was gentle but incisive. "Madame, you mentioned a hum before the silence. Could you describe it further? Its pitch, its duration." She frowned, closing her eyes as if recalling the moment. It was low, almost inaudible, like a distant machine. It came from above, perhaps, the rafters or the chandelier. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, madam. Your ear may yet solve this puzzle." As she departed, Holmes leaned back, his gaze distant. "Each suspect plays a role, Watson, but the stage is set by another hand. The hum Madame Voss described, the metal fragment, the oiled trapdoor, these are pieces of a machine, both literal and figurative. We must dig deeper into the theatre's past and its players' secrets. Tomorrow we shall explore the understage and the rafters. I suspect the answer lies where the audience cannot see." The weight of his words settled over me as we left the parlour, the theatre's opulent facade hiding a labyrinth of motives and mysteries waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 6. A Clue in the Orchestra Pit. The underbelly of the Royal Lyric Theatre was a world apart from the glittering auditorium above, a labyrinth of dusty beams, coiled ropes and forgotten props, shrouded in cobwebs. Holmes and I descended via a narrow staircase behind the stage, our lanterns casting flickering shadows that danced like phantoms on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and oil, and the faint echo of our footsteps seemed amplified in the confined space, an ironic counterpoint to the mystery of silenced sounds we pursued. Holmes, ever the picture of focused intensity, moved with purposeful strides, his magnifying glass at the ready. "Watson, the theatre's secrets are not in its spotlight, but in its shadows. The trapdoor we noted earlier leads here, and its fresh oil suggests recent use. Someone has been tampering below the stage." We emerged into the substage area directly beneath the orchestra pit. Massive wooden supports held the floor above, and amid them lay a tangle of mechanisms, pulleys for scenery, levers for effects, and a series of pipes that snaked through the gloom, perhaps remnants of an old ventilation system. Holmes knelt by one such pipe, his fingers tracing its length. "These are not for air, Watson. Listen." He rapped on it sharply, producing a resonant clang that vibrated through the metal. I leaned closer. "Acoustic pipes, like those in a church organ?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, his voice echoing softly, "but modified. See here, these joints are new, soldered recently. And this," he pointed to a small box-like device affixed to the pipe's end, partially concealed by a pile of discarded canvas. It was a contraption of brass and wires, with a dial and a series of valves that gleamed faintly in the lantern light. I examined it cautiously. "What is it, Holmes? Some sort of amplifier?" Holmes' eyes sparkled with recognition. "Not an amplifier, Watson. An absorber, a device designed to manipulate sound waves, perhaps by creating interference patterns that cancel them out. I recall a paper by Professor Rayleigh on acoustic interference, but this is applied science bordering on invention." He carefully detached the device, turning it over in his hands. Inside, a series of crystals and coils suggested advanced engineering. This hum Madame Voss described. It could be the activation of such a mechanism. Low-frequency vibrations that disrupt audible sound in specific zones, like the auditorium. "But how?" I asked, my medical mind struggling with the physics, and why attach it here, beneath the orchestra? Holmes paced the cramped space, his lantern illuminating more clues, footprints in the dust, leading from the trapdoor to a side passage. "The orchestra pit is the source of much of the sound. By placing it here, the culprit could target the waves at their origin, creating pockets of silence that spread upward. As for why, diversion. During the chaos, the theft occurred unnoticed." We followed the footprints down the passage, which led to a small alcove stacked with old instruments and sheet music. Amid the clutter, Holmes spotted a crumpled letter, half buried under a violin case. He unfolded it carefully, his brow furrowing as he read aloud, "Vain, the debt from 10 years past is due. The silence is but a warning. Pay or face ruin. E.T. "E.T. Edmund Travers," I exclaimed, recalling Holmes' sipped earlier research, the ruined composer from the scandal. Holmes nodded, pocketing the letter. "Indeed, Travers accused the theatre of plagiarism, lost everything in the courts. If he sets returned, this could be revenge, using his knowledge of acoustics, perhaps learned from associates like Durant Sitt's professor." A sudden noise from above, a creak of floorboards, alerted us. Holmes extinguished his lantern, pulling me into the shadows. Footsteps descended the stairs, cautious and deliberate. A figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, moving toward the device's former location. As they bent to search, Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the gloom like a blade. "Looking for this, Monsieur Durant?" The figure whirled, revealing Felix Durant Sitt's pale face, etched with shock. "Mr. Holmes, I was merely checking for sabotage. My music." "Save your excuses," Holmes interjected, holding up the device. "You recognized this technology. Didn't set you? From your studies with Professor Laroche, who experimented with sound cancellation for military applications." Durant sagged against a beam, his defiance crumbling. "Laroche was brilliant, but his work was stolen by rivals. I thought if I could use it subtly to enhance my compositions, create dramatic effects. But someone else knows. They twisted it against me. Holmes' gaze was piercing. The letter from E.T. Travers. You knew him? Durant nodded reluctantly. He was Laroche's assistant once, bitter, vengeful. If he sists back, he could be behind this. As we escorted Durant upstairs, Holmes murmured to me, "A clue, Watson, but not the full symphony. Durant may be complicit or a pawn. We must find Travers." And quickly, the next performance looms, and with it, perhaps the final act of this charade. The theatre above seemed brighter after the dim understage, but the weight of discovery pressed upon us. The device in Holmes' pocket was a key, yet the lock it fit remained hidden in a web of past grievances and present deceptions. Chapter 7. The Midnight Shadow. The clock in 221B Baker Street struck midnight, its chimes muffled by the thick fog that had once again descended upon London like a shroud. Holmes and I had returned from the theatre earlier that evening, the acoustic device safely tucked in Holmes' pocket and Felix Durant's revelations swirling in our minds. Yet Holmes was not one to rest when a case gripped him. Instead, he proposed a stakeout at the Royal Lyric, convinced that the culprit, be it Edmund Travers or another, might return under cover of darkness to retrieve or repair the sabotaged mechanism. We dressed in dark attire, Holmes donning a black Inverness cape that blended seamlessly with the shadows, while I carried my service revolver, a reassuring weight in my coat pocket. The streets were eerily quiet as our cab rattled toward Drury Lane, the fog swallowing the gas lamp's glow and turning the city into a ghostly labyrinth. "Silence in the theatre may be artificial, Watson," Holmes murmured as we alighted, "but this fog is nature's own veil, perfect for clandestine deeds." We approached the theatre from a rear alley, where a service door stood slightly ajar, evidence, Holmes noted, of recent entry. Slipping inside, we navigated the darkened corridors with care. Our footsteps hushed on the worn carpets. The auditorium lay in profound stillness, the stage a black void, the seats empty sentinels. Holmes led us to a vantage point in the upper gallery, concealed behind heavy drapes, from where we could observe the stage and orchestra pit below. Hours passed in tense vigilance. The theatre's old timbers creaked occasionally, like whispers from its storied past, and once or twice a distant rat scurried across the floorboards. Holmes remained statue-like, his keen eyes piercing the gloom, while I fought the chill seeping through the walls. Just as doubt began to creep in, a faint light flickered below, a lantern, hooded and dim, moving toward the orchestra pit. "There," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure, cloaked and hooded, descended into the pit, their movements deliberate. They knelt where the device had been hidden, searching frantically, the lantern's beam sweeping the shadows. Holmes signaled, and we descended stealthily, using the side stairs to avoid detection. As we neared, the figure paused, perhaps sensing our presence, and bolted toward the stage door. "After him, Watson," Holmes cried, his voice shattering the silence. The chase erupted into the foggy night. The suspect darted down the alley, their cloak billowing like a spectre, with Holmes and I in hot pursuit. The fog thickened, turning the streets into a maze where visibility extended mere feet. We heard the slap of boots on cobblestones, a muffled curse as the figure stumbled over a crate. Holmes, with his intimate knowledge of London's byways, anticipated turns closing the gap. We rounded a corner into Catherine Street, where the fog parted briefly under a gas lamp. The figure glanced back, revealing a glimpse of a bearded face, eyes wide with panic. Could it be Travers? They veered into a narrow passage between taverns, the air heavy with the scent of stale ale and coal smoke. I fired a warning shot into the air, the report echoing like thunder, but the suspect pressed on, vaulting a low wall into a courtyard. Holmes scaled the wall with agile grace, I following more laboriously. The courtyard was a dead end, cluttered with barrels and refuse, but the figure had vanished. Impossible, I panted, revolver at the ready. Not impossible, Holmes replied, his breath steady despite the exertion. He scanned the ground, spotting a manhole cover slightly askew. The sewers clever, but not clever enough. He lifted the cover, revealing a rusted ladder descending into dank darkness. The stench of effluent wafted up, but Holmes was undeterred. "Watson, your revolver light our way." We descended into the underworld, the lantern's beam reflecting off slimy walls and murky water. Footsteps splashed ahead, echoing in the tunnels. Holmes led, his senses attuned to every sound. "This way," he directed, navigating the labyrinthine passages that mirrored the city's streets above. The pursuit intensified, the suspect's pace faltering as fatigue set in. We caught sight of them rounding a bend, their lantern swinging wildly. Holmes accelerated, closing in. "Halt, in the name of the law," he called. The figure spun, hurling their lantern at us. It shattered against the wall, flames licking the damp stone before extinguishing in the water. In the momentary light, I saw the beard clearly, false perhaps. Darkness enveloped us, but Holmes pressed forward, guided by sound and instinct. A sudden splash and cry echoed ahead. We hurried to find the suspect sprawled in a shallow pool, ankle twisted from a misstep. Holmes pinned them down, wrenching back the hood, to reveal not Edmund Travers, but Clara Wren, her face smeared with grime, eyes defiant yet fearful. "Miss Wren," Holmes said, his tone laced with disappointment rather than surprise. "Your role in this drama is clearer now." She struggled briefly, then sagged in defeat. "You don't understand, Mr. Holmes. It's not what it seems." We hauled her to the surface, emerging into the fog-shrouded street where a constable, alerted by my shot, awaited. As we handed her over, Holmes murmured to me, "A shadow court, Watson, but the midnight has more secrets. Wren is a piece, not the puppet master. We must interrogate her at once before the next performance brings further chaos." The night air felt colder as we made our way back, the fog lifting slightly to reveal the first hints of dawn. The chase had yielded a suspect, but the mystery of the disappearing sound deepened, its echoes reverberating through the hidden tunnels of deceit. Chapter 8. Whispers of Science. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Scotland Yard, casting long shadows across the interrogation room where Clara Wren sat, her composure cracked but not entirely shattered. Holmes and I had accompanied Inspector Lestrade to the station after our midnight chase, and now, with the first rays of dawn painting the sky, we prepared to extract the truth from our captive. Wren's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between us and the stern-faced inspector, who paced the room with his usual gruff impatience. "Miss Wren," Holmes began, his voice calm and measured as he leaned against the wall, "your nocturnal escapade suggests complicity in this affair. You were searching for the acoustic device we discovered beneath the stage. Why?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I was trying to remove it, Mr. Holmes, to stop the sabotage before it ruined us all." Lestrade snorted. "Convenient tale. And the theft?" You had access to the safe. Wren's eyes flashed with defiance. I didn't steal the money. Yes, I knew about the device. Someone planted it weeks ago. I found it by accident while checking the understage for props. But I swear, I wasn't the one who installed it. Holmes' gaze was penetrating. Then who, Miss Wren? And why not report it to Vane or the authorities? She sighed, her shoulders slumping. Because it was Edmund Travers. He approached me a month ago, claiming the theatre owed him for past wrongs. He threatened to expose a secret of mine, a youthful indiscretion, a forged reference that got me this job. He forced me to look the other way while he set up his contraptions. The silence was his revenge, timed to disrupt performances and drive away patrons. I interjected, my medical instincts sensing her distress, and a Madame Voss mentioned, the metal fragments. Part of his invention, Wren replied, her voice trembling. Travers was a genius in acoustics, twisted by bitterness. He modified old organ pipes with crystals that generate interfering waves, cancelling sound in targeted areas. He demonstrated it to me once, in a small room. It was terrifying, like being deafened by magic. Holmes nodded slowly, absorbing the details. And Durant, his connection to Professor Laroche? Durant knew Travers from Paris, she admitted. They collaborated briefly, but Travers felt betrayed when Durant took credit for some ideas. That's why Durant was nervous. He suspected Travers' hand, but feared implicating himself. Lestrade crossed his arms. Where is this Travers now? We'll have him in irons by noon. Wren shook her head. I don't know. He contacts me through notes left in the theatre. The last one said the gala performance tomorrow would be the finale. Total silence, total ruin. As we left the station, Holmes' expression was thoughtful. His pipe clenched between his teeth. Wren's story rings true, Watson, but incomplete. Travers is the architect. Yet I sense accomplices. We need expertise to unravel this scientific whisper. By midday, we arrived at the modest home of Professor Elias Thorne, a renowned acoustician at the University of London, whom Holmes had consulted in past cases involving auditory puzzles. Thorne, a bespectacled man with a wild mane of white hair and a laboratory cluttered with vibrating forks, resonators, and peculiar brass instruments, greeted us with enthusiastic curiosity. Ah, Holmes and Dr. Watson, what auditory enigma brings you to my door this time? Thorne asked, ushering us into his study, where diagrams of sound waves adorned the walls like abstract art. Holmes produced the device from his pocket, placing it on the professor's workbench. This professor, a mechanism capable of creating localized silence through wave interference. We believe it's based on Rayleigh's principles, perhaps enhanced with piezoelectric crystals. Thorne's eyes widened as he examined it, adjusting his spectacles. Fascinating. Yes, see here, the quartz crystals, when electrified, produce ultrasonic vibrations that interfere destructively with audible frequencies. It's like shouting into a mirror that reflects your voice back perfectly out of phase, cancelling it out. But this scale, to affect an entire theatre, it would require multiple units strategically placed and a power source, perhaps a battery, or even the theatre's gas lines converted to generate current. I watched as Thorne sketched a quick diagram on a chalkboard, illustrating wave patterns colliding and flattening. The hum, he continued, would be the initial resonance, building the interference field. Once established, silence reigns until the device is deactivated. Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. Could such a system be controlled remotely? And what of its inventor, Edmund Travers?
You knew him, I believe.
Thorne paused, his enthusiasm dimming. Travers, a brilliant student of mine, years ago, obsessed with sound manipulation for theatrical effects. But after that scandal at the Royal Lyric, accusations of plagiarism, he vanished. Bitter, yes. Capable of this, undoubtedly. He theorized acoustic cloaks that could hide sounds, or, in this case, erase them. If he's refined it, he might have amplifiers hidden in the rafters or vents. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Amplifiers. That explains the oiled trapdoor and the pipes. Travers has turned the theatre into a giant instrument of silence. As we departed Thorne's home, armed with technical insights and a sketched map of potential device locations, Holmes turned to me. Whispers of science, Watson, elegant and insidious. Travers seeks not just revenge, but a symphony of destruction. We must return to the theatre and dismantle his orchestra before the gala. But mark my words, there's a conductor yet unseen in this performance. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as we hailed a cab, the pieces of the puzzle aligning yet hinting at deeper complexities. The mystery whispered on, its scientific secrets unraveling thread by thread. Chapter 9. The False Confession. The gala performance at the Royal Lyric Theatre was mere hours away, and the atmosphere in Reginald Vane's office crackled with tension. Holmes and I had returned from Professor Thorne's residence, armed with diagrams and a deeper understanding of the acoustic sabotage plaguing the venue. Vane paced the room, his face etched with worry, while Sir Henry Caldwell lounged in a chair, puffing on a cigar and exuding an air of forced nonchalance. Felix Durand hovered near the window, his fingers drumming nervously on the sill, and Madame Elena Voss sat poised on the edge of a settee, her fan fluttering like a trapped bird. Cloren's arrest had sent ripples through the company, and Holmes had summoned them all for a confrontation. Inspector Lestrade stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, while Holmes commanded the centre of the room, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon light filtering through the curtains. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes began, his voice steady and authoritative, "the threads of this mystery are weaving together. Miss Wren has confessed to aiding Edmund Travers in his scheme of revenge, a scheme that employs advanced acoustic devices to create unnatural silence, disrupting performances and facilitating theft. Yet I suspect her role is but a supporting one. Travers remains at large, and the gala tonight could be his crescendo." Vane stopped pacing, his eyes wide. Travers? That old ghost? But Wren, why would she help him? "Blackmail," Holmes replied crisply, "a secret from her past. But let us not dwell on motives yet. Monsieur Durand, you knew Travers from your Paris days. Why withhold that?" Durand shifted uncomfortably, his accent thickening with stress. "I feared association, Mr. Holmes. Travers was mad even then, obsessed with sound as a weapon. When the silences began, I suspected him, but proof, none. And my own experiments with LaRoche's ideas, I didn't want to be implicated." Caldwell blew a ring of smoke, his voice gruff. "This is all rot. Wren's the thief, caught red-handed in the sewers. Arrest Travers if you must. But let's get on with the show. My money's on the line." Madame Voss leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "And my reputation. If silence strikes again tonight, I'll be ruined. Mr. Holmes, you must prevent it." Holmes' gaze swept the room. Prevent it? Perhaps. But first, truth. Sir Henry, your investments, are they truly at risk, or is this a ploy for insurance? Caldwell's cigar paused mid-puff, insulting. I've poured fortunes into this theatre. Fortunes you can ill afford, Holmes countered. Rumours of your debts reach even Baker Street. A ruined theatre might yield a tidy payout. Vane interjected, his voice rising. Enough. I won't have accusations flying. Holmes, you've found devices. Remove them. The show must go on. As the argument escalated, a knock at the door interrupted. A stagehand entered, breathless, holding a sealed envelope. For Mr. Holmes, sir. Delivered just now by a boy who vanished into the crowd. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. From Travers, he announced, reading aloud. Holmes, your meddling ends tonight. The silence will be eternal. Unless Vane pays what is owed. Meet me in the understage at dusk, alone, or the gala becomes a farce. The room fell silent, the irony not lost on anyone. Lestrade stepped forward. A trap, Holmes. Let my men handle it. Holmes folded the letter, his expression enigmatic. No, Inspector. Travers wants a confrontation. Watson, accompany me, but discreetly. As dusk fell, the theatre buzzed with preparations for the gala, patrons arriving in finery, oblivious to the drama below. Holmes and I descended to the understage, the air cooler and damper than before. Our lanterns pierced the gloom, revealing the familiar tangle of pipes and supports. Holmes moved silently, his senses alert. A figure emerged from the shadows, bearded, dishevelled, eyes burning with fanaticism. Edmund Travers, clad in a worn coat, held a small control box in his hand. Holmes, he sneered, the great detective, you've uncovered my symphony of silence, but too late. Holmes raised a hand placatingly. Travers, your grievance is old. The plagiarism scandal. Fane's predecessor stole your work, but revenge now. Theft. It's beneath your genius. Travers laughed bitterly. Genius unrecognized. I slaved over acoustic innovations for theatres, effects to enhance, not destroy. But they took it, credited another. Now, with my interference devices, I'll bankrupt them. The theft was mere bonus funds to flee. He brandished the box, horn press, and amplifiers, hidden throughout. Activate. Total silence during the performance. Chaos. I tensed, my hand on my revolver, but Holmes remained calm. And Wren? Durand? Accomplices? Tools. Travers spat. Wren distracted. Durand provided old designs unwittingly. But I act alone. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Alone? Then explain the false beard we found in the sewers. Your disguise for the chase. Yet Wren wore it. Inconsistent. Travers faltered, his grip tightening. You're bluffing. Am I? Holmes stepped closer. Your confession is false, Travers. You're a pawn, confessing to shield the true mastermind. Before Travers could respond, a shot rang out from the darkness, grazing his arm. He dropped the box, clutching the wound. From the shadows emerged Sir Henry Caldwell, pistol in hand, his face twisted in rage. Caldwell, I exclaimed, drawing my weapon. Holmes nodded grimly. Indeed, Watson, the investor pulls the strings. Caldwell snarled, aiming at Holmes. You meddlesome fool. Travers was useful, but now silence for you all. The understage erupted into chaos as Lestrade's men, hidden on Holmes' signal, swarmed in. Caldwell fired wildly, but was subdued, his pistol clattering to the floor. Travers, bleeding but alive, slumped against a beam, his false bravado shattered. As the constables hauled them away, Holmes explained to me amid the commotion. Travers' confession was too eager, Watson, designed to end the inquiry. But Caldwell's debts made him desperate. He hired Travers for the sabotage, planning to claim insurance on the ruined theatre. Caldwell's own doing, to fund his escape. Vane, arriving breathless, stared in shock. Sir Henry. But why confess falsely, Travers? Blackmail, perhaps, Holmes replied. Or payment. We shall learn in time. The gala proceeded without incident, the devices dismantled, the air filled with Durant's music and Voss's voice. Yet as Holmes and I watched from the wings, I sensed his mind still turning. A false confession unraveled, Watson, he murmured, but the final notes of this mystery may yet surprise us. Chapter 10. Threads of Deceit. The aftermath of the confrontation in the understage left the Royal Lyric Theatre in a state of uneasy calm, like the quiet before a storm's second act. Sir Henry Caldwell and Edmund Travers were in custody, their roles in the acoustic sabotage and theft seemingly confirmed, yet Holmes' restless demeanour as we returned to 221B Baker Street told me the case was far from closed. The fire in our sitting room crackled as Holmes paced, his pipe sending tendrils of smoke curling toward the ceiling, his mind weaving through the threads of deceit we had uncovered. "Watson," he said, pausing by the mantelpiece, "Caldwell's desperation and Travers' vengeance form a compelling narrative, but it lacks harmony. Travers' false confession, claiming sole responsibility, was meant to shield Caldwell, but why? A hired man does not so readily martyr himself. And the devices, sophisticated, yes, but their placement suggests access only an insider could possess." I settled into my armchair, my notebook open. "You suspect another player, Holmes. Clara Wren, perhaps?" She admitted to aiding Travers under duress. Holmes shook his head, his eyes distant. "Wren is a pawn, coerced by blackmail. No, the true conductor of this symphony remains in the shadows." Recall the letter signed E.T. too conveniently placed, as if meant to be found, and Durant's hesitation when questioned about Professor LaRoche. There's a connection to an older case, Watson, one I nearly overlooked. He crossed to his cluttered desk, extracting a worn file from a drawer. 10 years ago, during the Travers scandal, I investigated a minor matter at the Royal Lyric, a stolen manuscript attributed to a composer named Maurice Laroche, Durant's mentor. The thief was never caught, but whispers pointed to a rival theatre owner, a man named Victor Grayson, who vanished shortly after. Laroche's work included early theories on acoustic manipulation, which Travers later refined. I leaned forward, intrigued. "You think Grayson is involved after all these years?" "Possibly," Holmes replied, his fingers drumming the file. Grayson had motive, professional rivalry with the Royal Lyric and the knowledge to exploit Laroche's ideas. If he's returned, perhaps under an alias, he could be orchestrating this to ruin Vane and reclaim his place in London's theatrical world. Determined to follow this thread, we ventured to the British Museum's reading room that afternoon, where Holmes pored over old theatre records and newspapers. Amid yellowed pages, we found traces of Grayson, a charismatic impresario whose own theatre, the Crescent, folded after the scandal, bankrupted by lawsuits. A grainy photograph showed a man with sharp features and a commanding presence, eerily similar to someone we had overlooked, Reginald Vane himself. "Holmes," I said, my voice low, "could Vane be Grayson? A new identity to escape his past?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. An audacious theory, Watson, but plausible. Vane's agitation, his vague references to detailed debt sets, they align with Grayson's history. If true, he may have staged the entire affair, using Travers and Caldwell as pawns to fake a crisis, perhaps to secure sympathy or funds. We returned to the theatre under the guise of checking for additional devices, our real purpose to confront Vane. The manager was in his office, sorting through ledgers, his face pale but composed. Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Vane, or should I say Mr. Grayson," Holmes said, his tone cutting. "Your past at the Crescent Theatre casts a long shadow. Did you engineer this sabotage to resurrect your fortunes?" Vane's pen froze, his eyes darting to the door, as if considering flight. Then he slumped, a bitter smile crossing his lips. "You're relentless, Holmes. Yes, I was Victor Grayson. I rebuilt my life as Vane after that scandal destroyed me. But sabotage? No. I've poured everything into the Royal Lyric. The silence, the theft, their attacks on me, not by me." Holmes studied him, unyielding, then explained the letter from Phi ATT Sec, the plant to misdirect us, and your presence during every incident, always conveniently distracted. Vane's hands trembled. "Travers contacted me months ago, demanding payment for his ruined career. I refused, thinking it bluster. Then the silences began. I swear, I didn't know about the devices until Clara confessed." Holmes leaned closer, his voice low. "And the theft, £500, taken from a safe only you and Wren could access." "I don't start, no," Vane cried, his composure breaking. "Perhaps Travers, or someone he hired. I start been framed, Holmes." As we left the office, Holmes murmured, "He's either a masterful liar or a victim. Either way, the threads of deceit tighten. Watson, we must inspect the theatre's financial records. Grayson's past may reveal who profits from this chaos. And Durant, his silence about LaRoche's work suggests deeper complicity. Tomorrow's gala will be our stage to unravel the final knot." The evening air was crisp as we stepped into Drury Lane, the theatre's facade, a mask hiding a tapestry of lies. The mystery pulsed like a heartbeat, its resolution tantalizingly close, yet veiled by one last deception. Chapter 11. The trap is set. The Royal Lyric Theatre stood poised for its grand gala, a glittering affair that drew London's elite like moths to a flame. Carriages lined Drury Lane, their horses stamping in the crisp evening air, while inside, chandeliers cast a warm glow over velvet-clad patrons and the hum of anticipation. Yet beneath the opulence, a darker current ran. Holmes and I were preparing to spring a trap to unmask the true architect of the disappearing sound. Back at 221B that morning, Holmes had been a whirlwind of activity, his mind weaving the threads of our investigation into a precise plan. "Watson," he had said, pinning a revised theatre diagram to the wall. "Travers' devices are dismantled, but the threat persists. Vane's identity as Grayson, Durant's connection to LaRoche, Caldwell's debts, all are pieces, but the puzzle lacks its centerpiece. Tonight we force the conductor to reveal themselves." His plan was audacious. Allow the gala to proceed under the pretense that all was well, while he and I, with Lestrade's men discreetly stationed, monitored key points, the orchestra pit, the rafters and the understage, where additional devices might be hidden. Holmes had enlisted Professor Thorne to recalibrate one of Travers' devices, not to silence but to emit a subtle, traceable hum, a lure to draw out anyone attempting to manipulate it. As the orchestra tuned their instruments, the theatre thrummed with life. Madame Elena Voss, resplendent in a sapphire gown, rehearsed her opening aria backstage, her voice a stark reminder of what was at stake. Felix Durant sat in the front row, his eyes darting nervously, while Reginald Vane, or rather Victor Grayson, hovered near the stage, his face a mask of forced calm. Sir Henry Coldwell, released on bail pending charges, but barred from leaving London, occupied his usual box, his expression sour. Holmes and I positioned ourselves in the upper gallery, a vantage point offering a clear view of the auditorium and stage. Lestrade's constables, dressed as ushers, blended into the crowd, their eyes sharp for any suspicious movement. Holmes held a small receiver wired to Thorne's modified device, which now emitted a faint, inaudible frequency designed to alert us if tampered with. "The trap is simple, Watson," Holmes whispered, his gaze sweeping the theatre. "If our culprit seeks to disrupt the gala, they subtle attempt to activate or replace a device, the hum will betray their location. We must be swift. Silence tonight would be their triumph." The curtain rose, and the songbird's lament began, Durant's score filling the theatre with haunting beauty. Voss's voice soared, each note a defiance of the previous silences. The audience leaned forward, enraptured, unaware of the drama unfolding in the shadows. I clutched my revolver, my pulse quickening as I scanned the crowd. Minutes passed without incident, the music flowing unbroken. Then Holmes' receiver buzzed softly, its needle twitching. "The rafters," he murmured, rising swiftly. We navigated a narrow staircase to the catwalks above the stage, a dizzying network of beams and ropes where stagehands adjusted lights and scenery. The hum grew stronger, guiding us to a corner where a small, familiar device, another of Travers' creations, sat nestled among the rigging. Holmes knelt, examining it. "Recently placed, Watson. Not one we found before. Someone's been busy." He disabled it with a deft twist, but his eyes scanned the shadows. A faint scuff of boots echoed nearby, and he motioned for silence. We crept along the catwalk, the music below swelling as Voss reached her crescendo. A figure moved ahead, cloaked in darkness, tampering with a second device wired to the chandelier's supports. Holmes sprang forward, his voice sharp. "Enough, step into the light." The figure froze, then turned, revealing not Travers, nor Vane, but Felix Durant, his face pale, a screwdriver in hand. "Holmes," he stammered, "this isn't but what it seems." "You said that before, monsieur," Holmes replied, his tone icy. "You tampered with the device, knowing its purpose. Explain, or Lestrade's men will escort you out." Durant's shoulders sagged, his voice barely audible over the music below. "I had no choice. Travers, he threatened to expose my past, my theft of La Rocheste's ideas years ago. He forced me to plant these new devices to ensure the gala failed. He sits here, Holmes, in the theatre, watching." Holmes seized the device, his eyes blazing. "Where Durant? No more lies." Before Durant could answer, a sudden crack resounded from below. The chandelier swayed violently, its crystals clinking as the audience gasped. Voss faltered mid-note, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Holmes cursed under his breath. "The trap is sprung, Watson, but the hunter is close to the understage now." We descended at breakneck speed, the gala teetering on the edge of chaos. Durant trailed, his protests drowned by the growing unrest below. The trap had caught a conspirator, but the true mastermind, Travers or another, lurked still, ready to silence the theatre once more. Chapter 12. Chaos in the Curtains. The Royal Lyric Theatre descended into pandemonium as Holmes and I raced from the rafters to the understage, Felix Durant stumbling behind us, his face a mask of fear and guilt. The chandelier's ominous sway had sparked alarm among the gala's audience, their murmurs swelling into cries as Madame Elena Voss's aria faltered on the stage above. The orchestra, sensing the unrest, played on valiantly, but the notes seemed fragile, as if the very air might swallow them again. Holmes' trap had ensnared Durant, but the true orchestrator of the disappearing sound remained at large, and the gala teetered on the brink of ruin. We burst into the understage, a cavern of shadows and creaking timbers, where the air was thick with dust and the tang of oil. Lestrade's constables, stationed at key exits, signalled their readiness, their lanterns casting jagged beams across the maze of pipes and supports. Holmes clutched the modified acoustic device we had found in the rafters, its faint hum now silent, disabled by his swift intervention. Yet his eyes burned with urgency, scanning the gloom for signs of Edmund Travers or another unseen hand. "Watson," he whispered, his voice taut. The chandelier sep's movement was no accident, a deliberate act to escalate the chaos. "Travers is here, or his proxy. We must find the master device controlling the others." Durant, panting from our descent, gripped my arm. "Holmes, I swear, Travers forced me. He rigged the entire theatre, amplifiers in the vents wired to a central control. He showed me once, in the old prop room. If he activates it now—" Holmes cut him off, his gaze locking onto a narrow passage leading deeper beneath the stage. "Show us, Durant. No more delays." We followed Durant through the labyrinth, our lanterns barely piercing the darkness. The prop room, a cluttered chamber filled with forgotten costumes and broken scenery, lay at the end of the passage. As we entered, a low hum greeted us, the same eerie sound Madame Voss had described. In the corner, partially concealed by a tattered curtain, stood a complex apparatus, a tangle of wires, crystals and brass valves, larger than the devices we had found before, its dials glowing faintly in the dim light. Holmes knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the intricate wiring. "A master control, Watson, capable of synchronizing multiple interference fields. This is Travers' sit magnum opus, a symphony of silence to cripple the theatre." Before he could disable it, a shadow moved behind us. I spun, revolver drawn, as a figure emerged from the darkness. Not Travers, but Reginald Vane, his face pale, but resolute, a small pistol in his hand. "Holmes," he said, his voice trembling yet firm, "step away from the device." I tightened my grip on my weapon, but Holmes raised a hand, his expression calm. "Mr. Vane or Grayson, as you once were, your presence here is no surprise. You've played the victim well, but this device bears your touch. The old debt Travers demanded. Was it a ruse to mask your own scheme, Aunties?" Vane's eyes flickered with a mix of defiance and desperation. "You're half right, Holmes. I am Victor Grayson, but I didn't create the silence. Travers did, to ruin me again. He forced me to play along, threatening to expose my past. I planted devices under his orders, but the theft, that was my doing, to escape his blackmail and start anew." Durant gasped, stepping back. "You?" But Travers said. "Travers lied to us all. Vane snapped, his pistol wavering. He used me, used you, Durant, to stage this chaos. He sits here, watching, ready to finish it. A sudden, deafening silence engulfed us, the hum of the device intensifying into an oppressive void. The music from above vanished, replaced by shouts of confusion from the audience. The gala was unraveling, just as Travers had promised. Holmes lunged for the device, but Vane fired a warning shot, the sound swallowed by the unnatural quiet. "Enough!" Holmes shouted, his voice eerily muted. "Vane, you set her a pawn in a larger game. Where is Travers?" Before Vane could answer, a trapdoor above slammed open, and a figure dropped into the room. Edmund Travers, his bearded face twisted in triumph, a second control box in his hand. "Too late, Holmes," he crowed, his voice barely audible through the interference. "The theatre is mine, to silence forever." Lestrade's men surged in, but Travers pressed a button on his box, and the silence deepened, disorienting us all. In the chaos, Vane lunged at Travers, their struggle toppling a stack of crates. Holmes seized the moment, diving for the master device and yanking out its central crystal. The hum ceased, and sound flooded back. Voss's voice, the orchestra, the audience's gasps, all crashing in like a tidal wave. Travers roared in frustration, but Lestrade's men subdued him, wresting the control box from his grasp. Vane collapsed, his pistol clattering to the floor, his face a mask of defeat. As the constables secured them, Holmes turned to me, his expression grim. "Chaos averted, Watson, but the curtains haven't fallen." Vane's confession, Travers' bravado, there's a deeper note yet to be struck. The gala resumed above, the audience none the wiser, but as we escorted our captives to the surface, I sensed the mystery's final twist lurking, waiting to upend all we thought we knew. Chapter 13. The Unveiling. The understage of the Royal Lyric Theatre, moments after the chaos of Travers' capture, buzzed with the aftermath of restored sound. The gala above continued, Madame Elena Voss' voice soaring once more, the audience's applause a distant roar through the floorboards. Holmes stood amid the toppled crates and tangled wires, his sharp eyes scanning the now silent master device, its crystal core shattered in his hand. Edmund Travers, handcuffed and glowering, was flanked by Lestrade's constables, while Reginald Vane, Victor Grayson, sat slumped against a beam, his face etched with resignation. Felix Durant lingered nearby, his expression a mix of relief and dread, as if awaiting further revelations. Inspector Lestrade mopped his brow, his voice gruff. "Well, Holmes, you nabbed the lot, Travers for the sabotage, Vane for the theft, and Durant for his part in planting devices. Case closed. I say." Holmes's lips twitched, but his gaze remained distant. "Not quite, Lestrade. The threads are tied, but the knot is loose. Travers' devices, Vane's desperation, Durant's complicity, all orchestrated, yet the motive feels incomplete. Why such an elaborate scheme for mere revenge or profit?" I stepped closer, my revolver still in hand, though the immediate danger had passed. Holmes Travers admitted to seeking vengeance for his ruined career, and Vane confessed to the theft to escape blackmail. What sits missing? Holmes knelt beside the master device, his fingers brushing a faint inscription on its brass casing, La Roche, 1880. This, Watson. The work of Professor Maurice Laroche, Durant's mentor and Travers' collaborator. The devices are his legacy, stolen and refined by Travers, but their deployment here suggests a purpose beyond personal vendettas. Someone else profits from this chaos. someone with a stake in the theatre's ruin. He turned to Travers, whose defiance had softened into a sullen scowl. "Speak, Travers, who commissioned you? Vane Sept's funds, Caldwell Sept's debts, or another?" Travers spat, his voice hoarse. "You think I tell? I built the silence for myself to see the royal lyric crumble as they crushed me. Vane was a means, a weak link. Caldwell was a fool, easy to manipulate." Holmes' Sist's eyes narrowed, and Durant, his knowledge of Laroche Sist's work, was no coincidence. Durant flinched, stepping forward. "I told you, Holmes, Travers forced me. He had letters, proof I Sept taken credit for Laroche Sist's theories years ago. I helped him place one device, nothing more." Vane stirred, his voice bitter. "Lies. Travers blackmailed me too, threatened to expose my past as Grayson. But I didn't know about the devices until the silences began. I stole the money to flee, to start over." Holmes paced, his mind visibly turning. "A web of coercion, each of you ensnared. Yet the precision of the device's placement, rafters, vents, understage, required intimate knowledge of the theatre. Only an insider could manage it undetected." He paused, his gaze settling on the trapdoor above, its hinges gleaming with fresh oil. "An insider still among us." Lestrade frowned. "You stood saying there stays another, but we got the culprits." Holmes ignored him, climbing the ladder to the stage level, motioning for us to follow. The gala's intermission had begun, and the wings were crowded with stagehands and performers. Madame Voss stood apart, sipping water, her sapphire gown catching the gaslight. Holmes approached her, his voice low but commanding. "Madame Voss," he said, "your ear for the hum was precise, too precise. You described its source as the rafters, yet no performer would notice such a detail, mid-aria, unless they knew what to listen for. Tell me, what is your connection to Maurice Laroche?" Her fan froze, her eyes widening before narrowing into a guarded stare. "Laroche, a name from my Paris days, nothing more. Why do you ask?" Holmes stepped closer, his presence imposing. "Because Laroche Sist's work is the heart of this mystery. You been in every performance, affected by the silence, yet never faltered beyond a moment. Sit's pause. Your distress was convincing, but your knowledge betrays you." Voss laughed. A brittle sound. "Absurd? I'm a victim of this madness, not its cause." Howells produced a small notebook from his pocket, flipping it open. "A telegram from Paris, received this morning from my contact at the opera. It confirms you studied under Laroche, not as a singer, but as his assistant in acoustic experiments. You vanished after his death, just as Travers did, and now, here you are, at the center of a theater plagued by his stolen science." The color drained from Voss's face, her fan clattering to the floor. The stagehands nearby fell silent, sensing the tension. Lestrade signaled his men to close in. "You orchestrated this?" Holmes continued, his voice relentless. "Travers was your tool, Vane your scapegoat, Durant your reluctant accomplice. The silence was to discredit the royal lyric, drive it to ruin, and allow you to seize control, perhaps to revive Laroche's legacy under your own name." Voss' composure shattered, her voice a hiss. "You can prove it, Holmes." "Oh, but I can," he replied, holding up the inscribed device. "Your initials EV, etched faintly on every device, a signature of pride. You trained Travers, supplied the plans, and used his vendetta to mask your ambition." Before she could flee, Lestrade's men seized her, her protests drowned by the resuming orchestra. Vine stared, stunned, while Durant sagged in relief, his own guilt diminished. Travers, still handcuffed, laughed bitterly. She used me, Holmes, her promises of fame lies. As Voss was led away, the gala sipped second act began, the music unmarred by silence. Holmes turned to me, his expression grim but satisfied. The unveiling is complete, Watson, but one twist remains. The stage is set for a final revelation, one that ties this all together. The theatre pulsed with life, but the air held a lingering chill, as if the echoes of deceit had not yet fully faded. Chapter 14. The Final Twist. The Royal Lyric Theatre glowed with the triumph of a gala restored, its chandeliers casting a golden sheen over the applauding audience as Madame Elena Voss's final aria, performed by an understudy after her dramatic arrest, rang clear and true. Yet in the wings where Holmes and I stood with Inspector Lestrade, the air was heavy with unresolved tension. Edmund Travers, Reginald Vane, or Victor Grayson, Felix Durant, and now Voss herself were in custody, their roles in the acoustic sabotage and theft laid bare. But Holmes' restless gaze, darting across the stage, told me the mystery's final note had yet to sound. "Watson," he murmured, his voice low amid the fading applause. "Voss's ambition to ruin the theatre for her own gain fits the evidence, her knowledge of Laroche's work, the etched initials on the devices, her presence at every incident. Yet something jars. Her arrest was too clean, her defiance too theatrical. A true mastermind would not leave such obvious signatures." I frowned, adjusting my grip on my notebook. "You think Voss is another pawn, but who else could orchestrate this?" Receipts accounted for everyone. Holmes' eyes narrowed, fixed on the orchestra pit where the musicians packed their instruments. "Not quite. Recall the letter signed E.T. to misdirection to implicate Travers, and Vane's theft, conveniently timed during the chaos. The devices required not just scientific knowledge, but intimate access to the theatre's workings, beyond even Vane's scope as manager." He turned abruptly, striding toward the orchestra pit. I followed, Lestrade trailing with a skeptical grunt. The conductor, Mr. Hargreaves, was overseeing the musicians, his wiry frame bent over a stack of sheet music. Holmes approached him, his voice sharp but controlled. "Mr. Hargreaves, a word. Your role in the Songbird's Lament is pivotal, yet you've remained curiously peripheral in this affair. Tell me, where were you trained in acoustics?" Hargreaves blinked, startled, his hands pausing on the music. "Acoustics? I sit to a conductor, Mr. Holmes, not a scientist. I studied at the Royal Academy of Music, nothing more." Holmes stepped closer, his presence commanding, "And yet you were present at every silenced performance, directing the orchestra through chaos without missing a beat. The master device in the understage was wired through the pit's ventilation pipes, pipes you as conductor would know intimately, having complained of their drafts in rehearsals." Hargreaves' face tightened, a flicker of unease crossing his features. "You sit reaching, Holmes. I sit a victim of this madness, like Vane." Holmes produced the shattered crystal from the master device, holding it up. This crystal, etched with EV to implicate Voss, was a clumsy forgery. The true initials, scratched beneath and nearly worn away, are J. Toss, yours, John Hargreaves. You studied under Maurice Laroche in Paris, alongside Travers and Voss, but you buried that past, posing as a mere musician. You orchestrated this entire scheme, not for revenge, but for control. The pit fell silent, musicians turning to stare. Lestrade sits, hand hovered near his cuffs, sensing the shift. Hargreaves laughed, a brittle sound, but his eyes betrayed panic. Preposterous. I'm no inventor. Why would I? For the theatre. Holmes cut in, his voice relentless. The Royal Lyric's success threatened your own ambitions. You own shares in a rival venue, the Palladium, struggling under your mismanagement. By sabotaging Vane's theatre, you aimed to drive patrons to your own, using Travers' devices, Voss's expertise, and Vane's desperation as your instruments. The theft was a distraction, the silence your weapon. Hargreaves' sister composure cracked, his hands trembling. You can sit, prove it, Holmes. Oh, but I can, Holmes replied, producing a folded document from his coat. A ledger from the Palladium, obtained this morning from your office via my irregulars. It shows payments to Travers for consulting, and a loan to Caldwell to deepen his debts, tying him to your scheme. You planted the ET letter to frame Travers and Voss's initials to shift blame when he fell. Hargreaves lunged for the exit, but Lestrade's men were faster, seizing him as he stumbled over a cello case. The conductor's protests echoed as he was dragged away, his carefully woven plot unraveling. Vane, watching from the wings, sank onto a crate, his face a mix of relief and ruin. Hargreaves, all this time, manipulating us all. Holmes turned to me, his expression grim but satisfied. The final twist, Watson. Hargreaves played the silent maestro, using others' weaknesses, Travers' vengeance, Voss's ambition, Van's secrets, Durant's guilt to compose his symphony of ruin. But a single false note, his initials, betrayed him. As the gala ended, the audience, oblivious to the drama below, Lestrade clapped Holmes on the shoulder. You've outdone yourself, Holmes. The yard still take it from here. Holmes nodded, but his gaze lingered on the stage, where the understudy Sip's voice filled the air. A satisfying resolution, Watson, but the cost of deceit is never small. Let us hope the Royal Lyric sings again, unmarred by silence. The theatre's lights dimmed as we stepped into the night, the mystery's echoes fading, but its lessons resonating in the quiet streets of London. Chapter 15. Echoes Resolved. The fog had lifted from Drury Lane as Holmes and I stepped out of the Royal Lyric Theatre, the gala's final notes fading into the cool night air. The arrests of Edmund Travers, Reginald Vane, Felix Durant, Madame Elena Voss, and the true mastermind, John Hargreaves, had restored the theatre's voice, but the weight of their tangled deceptions lingered like a faint echo. Inside, the audience dispersed, their applause for the understudy's triumphant performance a testament to the theatre's resilience. Inspector Lestrade remained behind, coordinating with his constables to secure the evidence, while Holmes and I hailed a hansom to return to 221B Baker Street. In our familiar sitting room, with the fire crackling and a decanter of brandy between us, Holmes leaned back in his armchair, his pipe unlit but clutched thoughtfully. "Watson," he said, his voice soft yet piercing, "this case was a symphony of human frailty, vengeance, greed, ambition, all orchestrated by Hargreaves' cunning. Each player believed themselves the lead, yet they danced to his tune." I sipped my brandy, my notebook open to capture his reflections. Hargreaves was a surprise, Holmes. His quiet presence in the orchestra pit hid a ruthless mind. But how did you know it was him, not Voss or Travers, pulling the strings? Holmes' eyes glinted in the firelight. The initials JH on the crystal, nearly erased, were the first clue, a signature of pride, not carelessness. Then, the ledger from the Palladium, revealing his financial stake in a rival theatre. Hargreaves used Travers' bitterness to build the devices, Voss's expertise to refine them, Vane's secrets to manipulate him, and Durant's guilt to ensure compliance. The E.T. letter and Voss's forged initials were misdirection, designed to scatter suspicion, but the theatre's ventilation system, known only to someone like a conductor, betrayed him. I nodded, marveling at the clarity of his deductions. And the theft? Was it truly Vane or part of Hargreaves' Sinclan? Vane's doing, Holmes replied, his desperation to escape his past, as Grayson drove him to steal the £500, but Hargreaves encouraged it, knowing the chaos would mask his sabotage. The silence was the true weapon to ruin the Royal Lyric and funnel patrons to his failing Palladium. He rose, pacing to the window, where the first hints of dawn tinged the sky. Yet, Watson, this case reminds us of sound's fragility. It is like truth, easily manipulated, easily silenced, yet always seeking to be heard. The Royal Lyric will recover, but its players bear scars of their own making. I closed my notebook, the weight of the adventure settling over me. A satisfying end, Holmes. The theatre sings again, and justice is served. Holmes' smile was faint but genuine. Satisfying, yes, but the world's cacophony continues. We merely quieted one discordant note. As we sat in companionable silence, the echoes of the case reverberated in my mind, a puzzle of science and deceit, unraveled by Holmes' relentless intellect. The Royal Lyric would indeed sing again, its stage free of shadows, but the memory of its silence would linger in the annals of Baker Street. And so concludes Sherlock Holmes and the Mystery of the Disappearing Sound. A tale where silence spoke louder than words, and the truth emerged from the shadows of deceit. From the fog-laden streets of Victorian London to the opulent stage of the Royal Lyric, Holmes and Watson faced a symphony of motives, vengeance, ambition, and greed, woven by a hidden maestro. With the theatre's voice restored and the culprits unmasked, this adventure joins the chronicles of their greatest triumphs, a testament to the power of deduction over even the most elusive mysteries. What did you think of this thrilling finale, dear listener? Were you as captivated by the twists as the audience of the Royal Lyric? Share your thoughts and tell us where you're listening from. Perhaps a cozy study in London, a bustling cafe in New York, or a quiet corner in Karachi. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't miss out. Subscribe to the channel now to join Holmes and Watson on their next adventure. The game is always afoot.